to postpone the reopening. Now, schools were scheduled to reopen today, and the CS said his ministry will work with the relevant agencies and stakeholders to put up measures to mitigate the effects of the rains. He also added that they will also provide regular updates on all developments. Now, that is the latest from the Ministry of Education, and that is to do with the government's plans to postpone the reopening of schools. And so that means, your learners will not be reopening today, neither tomorrow, but next week, that is May 6th. And that is for all schools across the country. And so that it will be also part of the conversation this morning on just that late communication, a press statement that was sent out at 1:27 a.m. And so that means a lot of parents and learners were not privy to that information earlier and might just have found themselves on different bus stations this morning. So we'll be having a conversation around that, as well as the floods, disaster management. How are we looking like? What has the response been like from various stakeholders across the country? Now, the Kenya Meteorological Department had earlier on informed Nairobi residents to brace themselves for heavy downpour. In a statement, the Kenya Met stated that the floods, which are in the third week, were not projected to relent soon. Now, they said heavy rainfall was expected in parts of Nairobi Metropolitan, and Nairobi Metropolitan covers the capital city as well as parts of Kiambu, Machakos, and Kajiado counties. Embakasi East and South are expected to experience the highest amount of rain, above 80 millimeters, and flooding is also feared in Starehe, Makadara, Kamukunji, Embakasi West, and parts of Embakasi Central. Now, Mathare and Ruaraka residents have also been warned of the risk of flooding, with rainfall ranging from 50 to 70 millimeters. All right, now apologies about that, but that is also the communication from the Kenya Meteorological Department. So allow us to take a quick breather. We'll be back shortly. Allow us to fix something. We'll be back shortly.
You are watching EBN TV, transforming your world. You are watching EBN TV, transforming your world.
Nashukuru kwa upendo wako, maana wewe ulinipenda. Upendo wako Yesu wangu sio kama wa mwanadamu. Hey, maana mwanadamu hayo anaweza kuchoka. Kwa majina naitwa William Chacha, mwimbaji wa nyimbo za Injili. Kupata wimbo huu upendo wako Yesu, kama sikiza tuni yako, dial *860 *279 hash. Kumbuka EBN TV inainua wasanii wote. Shalom. Anaweza
Walisema mnywa maji kwa mkono mmoja,
kiu yake pale pale. Ndiposa tumekuletea wewe mtazamaji wetu
mkono mwingine ili kukata kiu yako na ari yako ya ufahamu.
Naam, ngoma imechezwa mtazamaji, basi hatuna budi kulisakata kukuletea wewe ufahamu wa kaunti yako,
tukiangazia masuala ya siasa na uongozi,
jamii na itikadi,
maendeleo na changamoto katika kaunti yako. Ungana nami Belinda William,
nami Emmanuel Marwa
kwenye makala ya Gatuzi Langu kila siku ya Jumatatu saa 5:30 hadi saa 6:30.
You are watching EBN TV, transforming your world.
All right, welcome back. Now, several flights from and into the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport were delayed, diverted, and others cancelled due to flooding. Now, this comes even as the Kenya Airports Authority gave the approval for changes in the sections and ways of entering or leaving the airport of JKIA. The airport's ramp was flooded, making it impossible and dangerous for the planes to land safely. Some of the flights, both local and international, were diverted to other airports. Meanwhile, Kilifi County is staring at a humanitarian crisis as the river Sabaki burst its banks following increased volumes of water occasioned by heavy rains. The heavy rain pounding Nairobi area, Machakos and Ukambani regions has caused havoc in those areas, and the rainwater from the areas is being carried along the river Athi, which changes name to River Galana and later to River Sabaki as it enters the Indian Ocean in Malindi. The leadership is now calling for help.
Janga ambalo limetupata saa hii ni mafuriko. Wodi yangu kusema kweli imepata hili janga la mafuriko, na katika eneo zima vijiji karibu 11 vyote vimeweza kusombwa na mafuriko, hasa maeneo ambayo wananchi wanalima chakula. Yayo maeneo yote maji yameingia, yamesomba kila kitu, yamebeba kila kitu.
Kwa hii sehemu yetu ya Chakama, huu mto umeleta athari kubwa sana kupitia hii mvua ama hii mafuriko ambayo tumepata. Kuna mashamba ambayo yalikuwa na chakula ambayo ilikuwa tayari kuvunwa na kuliwa. Hizo chakula zote kama ni mahindi, ni maboga, yote yameweza kusafirishwa ama yamebebwa na kupelekwa sehemu za kule baharini.
Na hata huku tumetoka mmeona vile maji yamejaa. Lakini vile tunafanya kwa sasa, kule ambako hakuna hatari, watu wako juu, tumepata boats na Red Cross tunajaribu kuwapelekea chakula. Isipokuwa wale ambao wako kwa flatland tunaambia watoke. Kule ambako tunaona maji yanamwagika kama Dunguni na kwingine, tunaambia watu watoke. So far so good. Hatuja poteza maisha tu, tunajaribu kila njia kuhakikisha kwamba watu wanakuwa careful wasije wakaathirika na maafa.
Mimi ukiniangalia sasa
The newspapers now will kick it off with the standard anatomy of sick nation. The irony of a country that spends an arm and leg to train its highly prized professionals but wants to dump them into penury after graduation while its poor citizens wallow in disease without timely treatment amid opulence among political elites. So that is political elites. That is a story that is on page 2, 3, and 4 of the Standard this morning, where President William Ruto says, we mind about the doctors, we value the service they give to our nation, but we must live within our means. The resources we have are only sufficient to pay 70,000. Moses Kuria, CS for Public Service, says this is a guy who has just done his last continuous assessment test. We have budgeted for a doctor. We do not have a budget for students. So the anatomy of a sick nation. Now the current fee for medical students per year is at 600,000 shillings. Medical student fee per year in the early 2000s was at 38,000 shillings. So you can see the trajectory and just the increase of the cost of degrees and the cost of studies in Kenya. Now, clinical medicine, for instance, the cost per year is 720,000 shillings in a duration of 6 years, because they study for 6 years. And that means the total cost of that course after completion is at 4.3 million. For law, 261,000 shillings per year for 4 years. The cost of that course is 1.0 million, 0.4 million. Engineering, 441,000 per year. For 5 years, that's a cost of 2.2 million. Dental surgery, 780,000 per year. For 5 years, that's 3.9 million. Architectural studies, part 1, is at 360,000. For 4 years, that's 1.4 million. And then architecture 2, that is the professional studies, at 432,000. And that means for the 2 years will be 864,000. So those are the cost of the degrees in Kenya. But we'll have to take a particular interest, of course, in medicine, which, or medical surgery or clinical medicine or even dental surgery or even pharmacy, because these are the careers that are being affected with this particular doctor's strike. So the journey to being a doctor is not for the poor or for the faint-hearted. Now, paying a medical training fees is at 638,000, like I've mentioned. So we're spending about 600,000 shillings to train one doctor. But is it the turnover at the end of that course is not visible, because there's that 206,000 initially that was paying medical interns, but that has reduced to about 70,000 shillings. The government says they cannot live beyond the means, and 70,000 is living within its means. And so, anatomy of a sick nation, the irony of it all, as a country that spends an arm and a leg to train prized professionals but wants to dump them into penury after graduation, while its poor citizens wallow in diseases without timely treatment amid opulence among political elites. Patients agonize doctors in public hospitals, hustle in private practice. That means if you walk into a private hospital right now, you'd spend more than you'd have spent in public hospitals to treat a particular disease. So the anatomy of a sick nation, that is the headline on the Standard. Is government on Fuliza mode? What numbers show? That is a story that is on page 10. Fuliza mode, basically, are we taking in a lot of debts, contrary to just what we are repaying. So what treasury numbers show? KRA average monthly tax take this year has been 171 billion shillings against a target of 208 billion. So that means you're having a deficit of about, I believe should be 30 billion shillings monthly. And so Ruto recently said 7 out of every 10 shillings in tax collection goes into paying debts. So what remains behind for development, for recurrent expenditure, even the wage bill itself is 3 shillings per 10 shillings. So that speaks volumes of just where our economy is at the moment. Also, aspirants UDA polls are sham. Now, from failing gadgets to missing names of voters and candidates, aspirants say grassroots polls was decided elsewhere and winners just announced at polling centers. UDA kicked off its by-elections on Friday across various parts of the country amidst claims of digital gadgets failure. Now, to the Daily Nation, state to revise next budget by 350 billion shillings. The state to revise the next budget by 350 billion. And experts warn that the taxman's failure to hit revenue targets presents the government with no other alternative but to reduce its projected expenditure plans for the next financial year by up to 350 billion shillings unless it implements some of its pending taxation measures, including the introduction of a motor vehicle circulation tax and the controversial withholding tax on farm produce. So the question on the budget as well. Remember, the budget policy statement is currently in circulation ahead of the budget reading, which happens in the month of June. The budget that governs the financial year 2024-2025, which is projected to be at 4.2 trillion shillings. But the budget deficit also speaks volumes over 700 billion shillings in budget deficit. So this may force the state to, revise next budget by 350 billion shillings just to, accommodate some of these, various, what we call the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. Actually, that is better for it to accommodate better plans. That is the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. It may have to revise its budget and slash it so that it goes back to about 3.8 billion shillings. And so the MPs approved the 2.5 trillion shillings as projected expenditure for the executive in the next financial year, up from 2.46 trillion. They also approved 43.6 billion shillings in allocation to Parliament, up from the present 41.6 billion, and 23.7 billion to the judiciary, up from 22.8 billion. In the current financial year, now 8.6 billion for the Office of the Auditor General and 391.1 billion in equitable share to the counties. Now remember, the counties were demanding 450 billion shillings, but they've been given 391 billion. Now the allocation to counties is a marginal improvement of the 385 billion. So there's an increase of 5 billion in the current financial year, as the senators are pushing for 415 billion as per a report on the Division of Revenue Bill 2024 passed by the National Assembly. Also, top of the page, nature's fury, heavy rains continue to wreak havoc. We'll be having a conversation around this. Has the disaster been managed effectively? How has the response been like? When the government says move to higher grounds, or even the Kenya Meteorological Department says move to higher grounds, what is this higher ground? Where is this higher ground? Also, schools in flooded areas to remain closed. However, all schools, this morning to remain closed. And then finally, the Star, why Ruto party rejig plan threatens ODM party. Raila party laughs off UDA polls in its stronghold, describes the elections as a joke. And that is a story that is on page 4 and 5 of the Star this morning. Now, why Ruto party revival strategy threatens ODM party. Opposition Chief Odinga's ODM could brace for an unprecedented fight back to counter UDA after the ruling outfit rolled out its first ever internal polls. Now, the election schedule, the first phase, which was on April 26th, on Friday, was in Nairobi, Busia, Narok, West Pokot, and Homa Bay. Now, the second phase, which will be in June 22nd, will include counties of Mombasa, Uasin Gishu, Nyandarua, Machakos, Kisii, Bungoma, Siaya, Taita Taveta, Tana River, Kwale, and Marsabit. However, the elections have been marred by digital gadget failure. But, the take home from the Star is that, if you look at the counties that, UDA conducted its polls, including Homa Bay and Busia, which are largely described as an opposition base. If you look at the data of the 2022 polls. And so Ruto's rejuvenation plan centered around the ongoing party polls, according to observers, is working against the Orange Party, which is not keen on having similar party elections. ODM is instead mulling consensus to fill offices in the party, but most people want to express their choice and not have officials imposed on them. So it's a litmus test on the country's democracy in terms of party democracy, and whether or not parties do stand the test of time in holding party elections, grassroots elections for that matter, before they can now come to national party polls. When it rains, it indeed pours. That is on the Star. And the situation that has been in various parts of the country, thousands displaced. We are talking about 93 people that have died due to flooding, also properties destroyed. And so when it rains, it indeed pours. Like I've mentioned earlier, we'll be having a conversation about the response to the floods, the communication from the government. Is there a clear plan on how the government, even the county governments that have been affected by this flooding, will deal with the aftermath effects? Also, why this cycle? Is it just about not having proper infrastructure and facilities that may be able to stand the test of the floods? We're also taking a look at the JKIA, the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, which is one of the biggest airport within Africa, but gives a different, picture when it rains. So we'll be having a conversation around that you definitely do not want to miss. So that is the headline on the Star. Why Ruto party plans or rejuvenation threatens ODM party. Daily Nation speaks on state to revise next budget by 350 billion, as well as the Standard that speaks of anatomy of a sick nation. So much more when we return in a bit. Stay with us.
You are watching EBN.
You see both sides of the coin. The parents are very frustrated. They say, why do there's a lot of discussion in groups and on social media about Kenya being a last-minute nation. We make last-minute decisions, last-minute pronouncements, and people don't think too much about the logistical impacts. The final consideration is that the weatherman usually releases their outlook for the week on Monday, so that also was bearing. It was one of the factors that was feeding into the decision. So I can see the challenges on both ends, but of course the government is encouraged to be proactive in communicating such. Those decisions could have been made earlier. Nothing has to be perfect for you to make such a judgment call. You can certainly make the call, end of last week, Thursday, latest Friday, so parents can arrange themselves. So we had the usual supermarkets, flooding with the parents and students. We had the usual back to school amidst all these challenges, only for people to hear that they'll be postponed. The economic implications as well. Parents, some parents have multiple children, and they have them at home now for an extra week, and yet they were believing that the children will be eating at school. These are considerations in these tough economic times. On the flip side, some parents are celebrating to have their children home for one more week. So there's a lot of mixed feelings around that, despite the unfortunate circumstances that surround the issue.
Right. And it all falls down to when last did somebody actually speak directly to parents and assured them that either one, things were okay, or two, things were not okay. Because just as late as Friday, we had the Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua say it's all systems go, schools will be reopening. And so a lot of parents over the weekend already had that mindset about schools going back. But it falls back to, like I've said, who is communicating to these parents? Because everyone has been speculating, basically. As soon as the flood started, everyone was speculating, will schools be able to open with this kind of weather? Are the roads safe for the parents to go back? But the ministry has been insistent, through even the PS, Belio keeps saying that, it's all systems go, only for them to make that late change. As you said, there are logistical, issues to it. But it's a question of there was a feeling that things are not going to go okay.
So you had a lot of political leaders yesterday calling for schools reopening to be rescheduled or postponed. You had a lot of pressure even from church leaders for those to be communicated. But all these factors do not overrule the fact that proactive communication is. We are a very reactive nation, unfortunately. from a leadership point of view, there's room for improvement with regards to communicating proactively, thinking about, the end consumer of this information, the citizen on the ground who's affected by this, and the logistics they have to undergo. So everybody is trying to be perfect. You shouldn't be. Leadership is never perfect, especially when you're dealing with such circumstances that are beyond people's control. Certainly they should be able to make a judgment call early enough. Like you observed, a lot of people had said, yes, this is certainly going to affect schools. You noticed majority of schools, the roads leading to them are affected by this. Consider primary school. Majority of primary school children actually walk to school. Those that don't walk use vehicles, either private vehicles or school buses or something similar, pulled transport. So they are certainly bound to be affected the moment a particular road or a particular area is flooded. Consider the what are called the slum areas of Nairobi, which also have a lot of school-going children, and consider the impact that these children have. A lot of people don't tie these two things together. We talked about a lot of families that have been displaced being housed in schools, but they also have children in those families that are school going. I'll give an example. When there's an election, the schools are used as counting or polling centers, and the schools are either closed early or the opening is postponed to facilitate that. So there's an overlap here because we're still in the emergency, we're still in the crisis, the areas are flooded, the school zones are packed with displaced people. Organizations that like the Red Cross, governmental organizations, ministries, county governments, and other social, community-based organizations, they are housing and providing supplies to people in those schools. You can't just tell them to leave, and they've already been displaced from their homes, and the crisis is still ongoing. So there's a better proactive crisis management imperative that is needed in how we manage our affairs as a nation overall. There's a proactive mindset that is needed, and especially in decision making in a timely manner. That said, we shouldn't beat ourselves up too much because events like this are dynamic, they change every hour. So much happened overnight. The weatherman did give his forecast for the week, which remains as gloomy as has been before. A lot of new areas got flooded, some roads were cut off. You hear the Nairobi-Garissa highway now, there's an interruption there. There's so much going on real time that sometimes decision making is a bit it almost appears like a daisical. It's so lopsided and it's all over the place. From a bureaucracy perspective, I think there's a room for improvement. The technocrats and bureaucrats can do a better job at communicating, and then also from just a community and government and overall societal perspective, we can be more proactive and make these judgment calls earlier. So a lot of parents have been inconvenienced. A lot of last-minute changes will have to be done. Remember, the schools start cooking meals for students who are arriving, for those who are in boarding schools or even other day schools where there's meals provided. A lot of logistics go into play. So when you make a last-minute decision like that, some food will spoil. Supplies and groceries that had been shopped for ready for students today, tomorrow, the next day, that will have to be postponed. And the parents as well have to now stock up for children being there for one extra week. So it creates a lot of inconvenience. Had the decision been made even 72, 48 hours before, it certainly should have helped. A lot of students maybe come from up country, they have a relative living closer to the schools in the major towns or wherever they go to school. They already sent their children over, they were ready to go to school. It affects the morale of students, it affects the morale of teachers. The consequences, usually in leadership you weigh the pros and the cons, so the consequences and the cons of not communicating in time far outweigh the pros of the decision making and the overall sort of introspection that has to go when they are weighing these decisions. That said, there is room for improvement, and even though we understand where they're coming from, they can certainly do a better job with that.
A better job, indeed. And you've talked about crisis management, as a leadership and governance expert, because disasters are unavoidable in some extent. You can always preamble and say this and this could happen any minute from now.
Yes.
Because we saw that same situation with COVID-19. We've seen the same situation with floods. We see the same situation with drought. But whose responsibility is it? Where does the whole or the big burden lie in terms of who manages crisis or even who manages the communication on crisis communication? Where does the brunt lie?
So if we step back just a little, like I said first, as a preamble, we as a country and a society are too reactive, and need to be more proactive, which means we need to anticipate, in fact, the crux of leadership is being able to anticipate problems before they occur, being able to predict in advance what will happen, and most importantly, being able to create a plan. In this case, a disaster recovery plan, a disaster management plan, an emergency management plan. So what seems to be happening is that we are so reactive that by the time this situation happens, even when it's happening real time, you'll see a lot of leaders and responsible people kind of fumbling, and seeming caught out unawares. So the first issue is everybody has a responsibility. So there are responsibilities that lie within the national government, directly through line ministries, through state corporations or parastatals, and then through different agencies that have responsibility for management of these affairs. And then other responsibilities sit with the county government. The county governments have quite the bulk of responsibilities, with particular emphasis on the estates and the local areas and management of those. And then there are other responsibilities that even the citizens do have responsibility. For example, a lot of areas that are flooding today, a simple fix would be just unclogging the drains in the estates. But now the residents haven't organized themselves into residential associations or community associations that can handle that. They don't escalate that to the relevant authorities, and basically you're caught up with a flooding situation that costs you tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions for some people. People's properties are destroyed, vehicles are flooded, houses are flooded, and sometimes the fix is as little as making sure the leaves are swept off and don't clog the drains where they are storm drains that should be carrying the water. So the direct answer to your question is the major responsibility lies with the government, the national and the county government. We also have emergency management or disaster management or crisis management agencies that have the responsibilities for that. So the bulk of the problem appears to be the planning aspect of it. And planning isn't just about the direct disaster management itself or crisis management itself. We're talking about urban planning. We're talking about city planning. There's so much haphazard. A city, especially major cities, Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu, Eldoret. These are cities that are meant to be planned in a holistic manner, where somebody actually envisions the urban settings and manages. This is an industrial zone. This is a residential zone. That's a commercial zone. These are the road networks. When people build, these are the leeways the access roads they're supposed to have for utilities, for storm draining and all that. We have a problem with urban planning because, unfortunately, due to, like I said earlier, lackadaisical attitudes on the part of the people responsible. There's corruption also involved, where people can just go and get building plans approved that don't really factor the urban planning. We're seeing a lot of people building on riparian land where rivers or streams or other water bodies are nearby, and that area should not be a residential area. We're seeing people not letting water flow where it should flow, and we are seeing so much carnage and unnecessary property loss and displacement of families, so much pain and loss and suffering, just because the requisite urban planning, city planning is not done. So it's not just a disaster management planning where you actually anticipate we may have the so-called April long rains, or the major rains that come during this season, or these kinds of storms that we're experiencing, but also just the normal basic planning that says we should have our infrastructure in place, we should have our culverts and the drains that drain the water clear. People should not be constructing, people should not create kiosks and dump garbage around those areas. So overall, there's a lot of problem, like I said, with the reactive management. There's a lot of problems with failure to do proper emergency or disaster or crisis management. There's also failure of leadership with regards to urban planning. And you see a lot of major infrastructures affected right now that people should have thought of before this happened. Yes.
All right. So as we switch this conversation to what led us to this point, and that is on the floods, disaster, and just the response around it. We've looked at various issues that have risen up during this flooding period. But just to finalize on the schools reopening, and a reminder that the Ministry of Education has announced that schools will be reopened next week. That is May 6th, 2024. So if you had put your learner on the road this morning, perhaps at day school, then you're likely to get them back home as soon as possible. More directions, of course, will be given by respective schools on which way forward now. If your learner was reporting this morning and was on their way already to a boarding school. So more directions, of course, will keep on developing throughout the day, but particularly from your school on the direction and the way forward. The government says, due to data that has been compiled by field officers that have been working within the education ministries in the counties, the data reveals that a lot of schools have been affected due to flooding, and so it is best that the learners stay home to Monday 6th, and that applies to all 32,469 primary schools, as well as all 10,502 secondary schools nationwide. Keep giving us your response as a parent. How are you feeling? Are you inconvenienced? Was this the better position by the government to take this morning? Just share with us your feedback, and we'll be able to sample it just before we conclude this broadcast. Now, how about now we talk about the floods themselves and the disaster response. The death toll has now risen to 93 people that have succumbed. We saw Tuesday, Wednesday last week of various rivers, that have burst their banks. In fact, in Nairobi County, the governor says all 8 rivers burst their banks. That led to flooding along areas like Mathare. You had areas in Langata, in Parklands, and even in the capital city where a tree actually fell down at the center of the central business district. Kinuthia, from where you sit as a leadership and governance expert, just from an overview, has the response been effective on the disasters?
No. That's a simple answer. Like I said, there's such a reactive approach to disaster management and just management of the nations and counties and city affairs that you see a lot of leaders appeared caught unawares. The deaths are the most unfortunate part of it. You will see a lot of the deaths are occurring when people are trying to traverse a normal route they usually pass, or trying to circumnavigate that normal route that has been interrupted by the floods. So you will see people in a bus, you will see people in a truck, in a pickup truck, in a personal vehicle, people even in a boat. So the first one about vehicles is just people trying to cross the road, but it's overflown by a river or a stream or a creek or other water body, and you find that the vehicle is not able to sustain its weight and traction on the road, and it's swept away. And number two, you see the boats, there are areas that are roads that are now rivers. People are being literally transported by boat in urban areas. And there is now the regular boat traffic, which is unfortunate. I was watching, a boat capsize in the northeastern area, and some of these events are just terribly unfortunate. There are some basics that should have been in place. For example, you notice that boats are overloading a lot now that we have the crisis of flooding. You notice that people are overcharging for those particular modes of transport, where I had a resident in the Garissa area complaining that they are being charged 1,500 shillings to cross a particular area, and they were saying some of these are boats that belong to organizations that should have been or governmental related or community-based organizations, non-governmental organizations, which should not have been charging in the first place. But what happens when they charge and somebody cannot afford? People take risks, people take unnecessary risk. You notice there isn't sufficient preparedness in terms of people being communicated. We have seen, especially the Red Cross have done a super job. The Red Cross now is almost like a governmental organization. They're keeping the tallies, they're distributing their resources all over. They're the ones taking care of displacing people, of course, working hand in hand with the national and county governments, and perhaps getting a lot of funding also from the same. But the point is, you notice there's a lot of information that's coming out now that we are in the fact. So basics like don't cross a road where there is half an inch of water or more, just basics. Think twice before attempting particular modes of transport in particular settings. Actual enforcement of rules, so that if a boat is supposed to be carrying 10 people, there should be authorities that are there to enforce it and make sure people are not capsizing haphazardly. You now notice there are issues with the wild animals. You see in the news people complaining suddenly the hippos, because the waters have have come up to a level they've never come up before. I had a woman saying we've never seen this level of flooding and water rising to our homes. Now the hippos have made our homes their homes, and they're afraid for their lives. You'll see a lot of displacement of wildlife that causes wildlife-human conflict. You see a lot of property damage, so many vehicles being flooded, houses being flooded. You see people complaining they're on their roofs and the water is coming up. I saw a really heartbreaking video where children are screaming. They're on top of a roof, and things are just, the water is so rapid, and people underestimate the power of water. Water is not a force to be joked around with. The moment it takes on that speed, even where people usually cross, you have to be careful. So there's a lot of proactive communication that is missing. That should have been there in place by the time this happens. There's also a lot of haphazard sort of information release, where people don't even know when to expect that information release and how they should plan around it. There's a lot of running around and catching up with the disaster by different leaders, like you said. Across a weekend, different people communicating different messages. Then by the end of the weekend, everything has changed. So we as a community need to get serious about not just disaster management, but managing the affairs of the country as a whole, the counties, the communities, and all the organizations, government and non-governmental organizations, all involved. Now, the citizens have their roles too. I'm hearing a lot of people pointing their hands and fingers and fists at leaders, but these leaders are chosen by the people. So when you elect incompetent people at whatever level, MCA, MP, senator, governor, national government, name it, you are entrusting the management of the country's affairs to those people for the next 5 years. So when people say when people are corrupted with money, when people don't take seriously the process of electing leaders, our leaders are only as good as their people, and certainly do reflect the people and the community that employs them. So you notice a lot of last-minute rushes. Roads are cracking, bridges are cracking and falling apart. The way we do public works, there's a lot of incompetence around that, a lot of corner cutting. People are cutting corners to save cost, to steal money. Roads are not built to code, to standard. The agencies that are responsible and should be, the engineering outfits that should be supervising these public works, they are asleep on the job. So you notice, I was just coming here, and just pools of water on the road, you're hitting such huge potholes and bumps that clearly tell you this road was constructed poorly, and it's all over the city, all over the country. You meet substandard bridges and roads and infrastructure. So we have a challenge from a governance perspective. We have a challenge from a planning perspective. We have a challenge from a structural and engineering perspective. We have a challenge from a communication perspective. We have a leadership challenge for sure. And there are so many things. We notice our key infrastructure. Look at our airports, you know, they become a shame, just a proper shame. Water is leaking from the roof. You know, the underpasses are flooded. Now the whole airport is flooded. I saw the air side, which is where the planes are, it's flooded, you know. We really need to take some of these things seriously. Rains have always been with us. Certainly this season is quite unusual, and heavy rains are turning into huge storms. We are looking like abroad, you know, where major storms just come and sweep with everything. But there's a lot that should have happened. County governments, you know, basic things like clearing drains and storms and building to code and ensuring the estates are properly planned. Things that are so basic, they would save human lives. Now, when all these things are coming together, there's not only a domino effect, but the effect is multiplied times over. When the roads are not working, the rivers are over flooded. You mentioned all the rivers in Nairobi being flooded, and in most areas in the city, the catchment areas, the dams, the Seven Forks dams, you hear now it's come to capacity. The water is expected to overflow into the neighboring areas. The citizens entrust the governmental organizations, ministries, state corporations, agencies, the government as a whole, and county governments and all these organizations. People expect better leadership. People expect, visionary leadership where you plan ahead, you anticipate a problem, you fix it or mitigate it before it comes. There's an issue of budgeting. People have been playing around with budgets for infrastructure, for roads, for bridges, for repairs, for basics that should have been mitigating some of what we are seeing. The budgets have been eaten up. People are just playing around and, you know, going for trips and doing a lot of nonsense really that has nothing to do with the leadership at the cost of critical infrastructure and critical preparedness like we should have today. So the citizens need to think twice about the leaders we are electing. The leadership needs to get its act together and stop having that lackadaisical approach that just says, oh, we'll get there when we get there, you know, and planning needs to be serious. These are lives we are talking about. Now we are approaching 100 lives. I'm sure by now when we are talking, we are clocking 100 plus lives lost. We are talking, almost 40,000 people affected in their households affected by the floods. We're talking 20-something thousand people displaced from their homes. We are talking across the country, hundreds of thousands of people impacted by these floods. We are talking deaths. We are talking injuries, we are talking loss of property, we are talking schools that now cannot be open, we are talking loss of livestock, loss of livelihoods, people who have businesses just being flooded out. When you consider the total societal impact, we should have budgeted better, we should have planned better, we should have anticipated better, we should have had plans in place to deal with all of this, complete with the budgets to go with them, complete with the requisite leadership that's necessary to bring people together and tell them, hey, we're gonna survive these storms, but this is what you need to do. This is the government's responsibilities, this is the county's responsibilities, national government, county, community-based organizations, NGOs, everybody has a responsibility. And then execution, we have a challenge with execution. People are just going helter-skelter, just trying to fix things after the fact when disaster has already happened. And finally, when you zoom out and look at the holistic situation that the country is in, the citizens need to think very seriously about competent leadership, elections based on issues, so that from the grassroots we have leaders who are capable and competent and take seriously the role of their roles in governance. And then as a nation, moving away from this culture of corruption and cutting corners and people getting plans approved that should not be. We're having so many buildings collapse. they're not being built to code, they're not being built to standard. We have many challenges as a society. They can be surmounted. I believe the citizens are the boards of directors of this country, and they need to take their role seriously. We should move away from mutuetu and electing people who have money to give so that now they can steal and make more money to give next time. We need to move to capable leaders who are able to communicate issues properly, lead properly, and execute when the rubber meets the road. No life should be lost because of rain-related flooding.
Right. Now, the second point as well is on budgeting.
Yes.
Because if you look at the budget that is to cover for the financial year 2024-2025 for Nairobi County alone, a budget that has been directed into disaster management and coordination is at 536 million shillings. And that means for the year 2023-2024 it's also to the tunes of hundreds of million shillings. But it comes to, are we even using this money in an appropriate way? Because you're having a situation where there's flooding that has happened in Mathare, and houses have been swept away, lives have been lost, persons have lost their livelihoods, as you say. There are schools that have actually as well been, swept away. But on just whether the government or the county government, for that instance, is using this money to even help in terms of relocating and supporting the persons that have been affected. What we are seeing at the forefront is, well-wishers who are coming out and doing harambes online and buying mattresses and buying, food stuff for persons that has been affected. And yet the county government says, we are responding effectively, we are coordinating, we have multilateral teams, bilateral teams, and you're like, too much English, but where's the actual usage of this money that has been budgeted specifically for disaster management and coordination?
The challenge we have is that we have big budgets, we have lots of talk, but when the rubber meets the road, you don't see the effect on the ground, you don't see the results, you don't see where those hundreds of millions are really going to. And they're not properly apportioned. It's not just about, for example, a lot of roads, bridges, and other infrastructure that have been compromised by the rains should have been remediated before that. We're talking inspection. We're talking, repairs and structural, mitigation to make sure these bridges are, worthy of withstanding weather of this sort. We're talking about planning. We're talking unclogging the drainages, basics, garbage collection in a way that makes sense. We're talking about, we talked of slums, we talked of Mathare, you hear Mukuru kwa Ruben, you hear all these areas. People are suffering. Already, this, the citizens of this country who economically are, on the lowest tier, so that every day is a struggle. Just not getting to work means people don't eat. And then now you're saying their houses are flooded, their goods are damaged, their roads are not even visible. The waters are streaming right by them. We're talking Kibra or Kibera as a whole. We're talking all these areas where people can't even come out of their houses. Others don't have houses. Where I was hearing a very sad lamentation by a woman saying, now they can tell me to go anywhere. I have nothing, I don't have anything to hold on to. I just want to survive. And as leaders and as a community, we have a responsibility to take care of the least among us who are struggling from a day-to-day basis. And we are really letting these people down. Already, they should not be living in the conditions they already live in. And then now the floods come, people don't have homes, their properties are destroyed, they don't have even food to eat. Groceries are not getting to them. The regular infrastructure and logistics and supply mechanisms for getting basic foodstuffs to these places, they're not getting to them. We appreciate seeing the government. We saw the deputy president and his wife distributing foodstuffs to people in Mathare. But that is the least that can be done. It's too late in most cases. You're feeding somebody who has nowhere to sleep. And their lives are just being torn apart, and then they don't have the economic power to be able to make those adjustments, like the shop was not supplied with bread or unga or other basic foodstuffs because no vehicle could get there and the shopkeeper is not there. The shop is destroyed anyway. How are these people going to get those foodstuffs? They are not going to work. They can't get out of their homes. They don't have money to buy basic food. How are they feeding their people? So like you observed, the budget shouldn't just be about infrastructure. It should be about all the planning that people think ahead and say, should this and this happen, you simulate the possibilities and say these are the likely scenarios and this is how we are going to mitigate this problem. So as a nation, and especially national government and county government and other state agencies, we need to be serious about how we deal with matters that affect Kenyans. We become very funny in terms of accountability. People only accountable just before the elections when they come and quickly build roads. And that's why some of this infrastructure is in shambles, because it's done haphazardly, very hurriedly, last minute. The regular mechanisms for planning and design and architectural considerations and engineering structural considerations and other approvals that go there, they're not being done. And you find that we are doing so many shortcuts that sadly a lot more people are going to lose their lives as a result of this sort of poor management. So overall, the results on the ground don't reflect planning. Even the planning that is there, the minimal one, does not reflect the budgets that are done, and people are not thinking comprehensively. We really must become professional, especially from a governmental perspective. There's a lot of, there's a lot of haphazard and just really strange leadership styles where people just don't care until stuff has happened and they are rushing, and then there's bravado saying, like you said, oh, we are taking care of it, kizungu mingi, like you said it, and it doesn't translate. When the rubber meets the road, you don't see it on the ground. So we need to be very serious about governance and professionalism in conducting these affairs. A lot of people who should be planning and thinking ahead either are not doing their jobs, or when they do their jobs, they are not being let, because there are all these clowns running around eating these budgets and playing around with them. You had a lot of discussions about budgets that are being cut significantly or not or being reapportioned elsewhere, and now we are seeing the results. And anywhere where people are losing their lives just trying to survive from a day-to-day basis should not be an acceptable outcome.
Right.
Yes.
Now let's speak on the recovery road ahead. And you mentioned an important point on urban planning. And in fact, this is such a crucial issue that has led to even we have a CEC of urban planning as well. Now, there's a popular take, or not so popular among others, on the affordable housing and on whether or not we should focus as a nation on building houses, or should we focus on actually ensuring that the houses or the land we are building these houses on is in an appropriate place, because there's no need to put up a structure, huge structure, but at the end of the day you have to deal with flooding on that same structure. So can we speak about recovery, and from this point onwards, how should we be able as a country, as a nation, to prepare in terms of urban planning, particularly in cities like Nairobi? If you're going to talk about persons living along the riverbeds to vacate, so what happens next after they've vacated? Does that solve the problem completely?
It's really unfortunate, because when we talk about let's talk about urban planning, for example. You mentioned affordable housing. Some of these issues appear very fueled by politics. Some of them appear very fueled by issues that tell you this particular aspect had not been well thought out from beginning to end, and the effect. Every Kenyan has a right to have a home, a roof over their head. Even a long time ago when we were in school, we were told, the basic needs, shelter is primary among them. But you notice the way it's being done now, there is too much haphazard construction. The riparian lands close to water bodies are being, where before people used to be, this is zoned off. When people, when you're doing the maps, when you're having the acreages surveyed, any riparian section of land was not approved for housing. But now we are seeing those are the places where these clowns are going and getting, the compromised people in urban planning departments of county governments to go and approve buildings on those riparian lands. And then these structures come up. And now when it is flooding, these structures are falling under their weight. The ground under them is shifting. Many of them are not built to code, so they are having cracks and just coming down. And there's a lot of problems when it comes to urban planning. Urban planning shouldn't just be a county government issue. I really believe as a nation we need to get our act together, because a long time ago, we used to get it really right. I was looking at a booklet, the neighboring estate to where we are right now, a very detailed booklet that it was a homeowner's manual sort of booklet that gives everything. It apportions the land for public use. This is for schools, churches, police stations, utilities, and all this. Very careful urban planning. People used to take their job seriously. Now we are living in an age where sad to say, we just have a lot of jokers who, are in positions where they don't realize that any time you cut corners in urban planning, and this is not on just the government side, there's also on the citizen side who are building these properties. Somebody gets, a few, millions, and decides, I'm going to cut corners and build everybody has, you need flats, you need rental units, you need, residual income, fine. But they are so greedy and this corrupt mentality, and it's very annoying because they are not thinking that the people who will be their clients, who will be living in their houses, deserve a decent life, decent housing. And they are cutting these corners. They are the ones going, corruption is a two-way street. We shouldn't just, like I said, we shouldn't just point at leaders. We are the ones who elect them. The same thing, corruption needs somebody going to corrupt that person to cut shortcuts so that they get a map approved, building designs, architectural designs approved, the urban planning part of it. They don't want to leave the requisite area for access, the requisite area for utilities, the requisite areas for a road, the drainage sections. They don't want to even plan. You see, one thing that really frustrates me, you see businesses, large businesses and large commercial, outfits, large residents, building estates, where you can't even get a decent road to go to that place. You're making millions of shillings from citizens, and you can't even apportion a bit of that to fix the roads and fix the drainage. We have a very greedy sort of mentality when it comes to how people approach business, whether it's the individuals building units, whether it's on the larger scale of businesses that are in a community and don't feel any responsibilities to take care of even the drainage around their premises, the infrastructure, the roads. People are so self-centered that we've lost that community mindset. We've lost that, social responsibility aspect. People talk about CSR and, it's just a lot of, nonsense, because their hearts are really not there. So they just want to tick off a checkbox, we did CSR, but now they're not really thinking through, what is my corporate social responsibility as a business that's taking money from citizens in a particular area? What's my responsibility as a citizen who is living in a particular area in terms of proactively seeing where things are not going wrong, organizing ourselves and having leaders within the community? We've talked a lot about Nyumba Kumi. People are not organizing themselves in these residences. Everybody wants to live in their own house and enjoy their own individual challenges. So the estates have been left, to just, the county will do whatever the county will do at whatever time the county will do. People don't take up, I've been a leader in communities, like over 20 different settings, and every time you pay a big price just standing up and starting to engage the authorities, because they are not used to that. People don't talk to them. People don't, the requisite organizations, whether it's power, whether it's water, whether it's, sewerage, whether it's, all these organizations. People are not taking their responsibilities seriously. So, like I said before, from the government side all the way to the citizen sides and everything in between, state agencies, state corporations, line ministries, county governments, we are very lackadaisical, very, 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 very light-minded, very, words are failing me. It's very frustrating to see people taking it so lightly and like it's a joke. And then people are losing their lives, people are losing their livelihoods, people are losing their homes, people are losing their property. It should not be that way. And everybody, it starts with the citizens. Start getting your work, you're taking your work seriously when it comes to electing leaders and organizing yourselves as communities, and don't be bribed easily, don't be given money to elect whom, to where to, or some guys who are just going to be jokers. Get real leaders, and it's a fact in Kenya that real leaders who are capable and competent get nowhere in politics. They are not willing to bribe, they are not willing to pay their way, they are not willing to steal. So these jokers get into office, and then now we have a problem. And I'm talking especially at these local community levels, MCA level, and all the way to MP, the county government sort of infrastructure, electing your governors, your senators, whether from a national or a county level. We have a real challenge as a country. So the long and short of it is, we've said this thing so many times. This has happened so many times. People have been flooded again and again. The weak spots are known. The roads with issues are known. The rivers that overflow are known. The bridges where there's a challenge are known. We know we have a problem, but we keep talking and very little action is done. And it's a high time the citizens held the leaders accountable. It's a high time the leaders held themselves to account. It's a high time the accountability rests with the chief executives in any department, with any government organization. Start holding people accountable. Introduce professionalism. Let this bravado and lots of talk and just because you're connected to some leader you think you can do whatever you want. Let this stop. Let people realize if you yourself have a roof over your head and the people that are under you, that you have leadership over, are struggling with this kind of basic problems, then you should not be comfortable, and you should be out there, planning, out there, budgeting, out there doing the requisite things to make sure people do not encounter this kind of challenge. So we have major problems. These are leadership and governance problems. They are structural problems. They are societal problems like corruption. They are greed problems as citizens. People just become greedy and self-centered and don't think about your neighbor. And we are people of faith. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Basics. People do not pay attention to those things. They just think me, I, and myself. You put that building quickly, cut corners, get the cheapest materials, you put it up, and then people are collapsing in that building. You build on riparian land next to a river. The river comes and it wants to move with everything. You have estates and roads and bridges that are not being maintained properly, budgets that are not being used properly. You have disaster management that is absent. You have major installations like airports, and we are struggling. Last time it happened, we were told, oh, this is done. We are good. Everything will be fine. We've put the best. No. Now it's a shame. It's a disaster that we're having to close sections of airports. Air traffic is impossible. And my heart goes out to the people in the remote parts of the country where you're seeing the greatest carnage. Just school children and families trying to cross an area where the road has been washed off, the bridge has been washed off, the river has overflown, and people are losing their lives. It should not be that way. There's too much drama in politics, and people need to just, zip it and start working. And the citizens also need to hold these leaders accountable. Right. Status quo is not acceptable, right. And we can't come back here again. Yes.
Yeah. So as we wrap this conversation up, Kinuthia, there's this word that keeps being thrown around by leaders. When you're in an area that has flooded, move to higher grounds. And Kenyans really don't seem to understand what higher grounds is. And it all falls down to, has there been enough education on just as an individual? Because the government may not be able to reach all 42 million people. Yes. But as an individual, do people understand, what are some of the things that they need to do? Has there been enough civic education on just when in the event a flood happens, what to do, where to go? Because that is also one of the biggest challenge. We don't seem to understand, because there are some accidents which have unfortunately occurred, and you sit back and think about it and feel something could have been done, because if this is an overflowing river and there's a lorry that wants to go across, due to past incidences where we've seen a lot of lives that have been lost, and people still go to the same scenario in a lorry, trying to cross a place, then things go sideways and you're losing 9 people from that particular incident. So with civic education, has there enough that has been done for people to understand the dangers that come with flooding as we wrap it up?
The answer is no. Part of disaster management is contingency planning. This is an evacuation plan, this is the evacuation route, and this is the evacuation destination. You say, these people are going to move from this place to the other. Yeah, that term, move to higher ground, people are just pulling words from books and theory and what happens abroad. But where is higher ground? Is it somebody else's property who's above you? Private property? Is it the top of a mountain? Where you can't even get up because now all the major hills and mountains have streams and rivers rushing down. What exactly do you mean when you say move to higher ground? Like I said, there's a lot of jokers, who are unfortunately responsible over people's lives, so that people are just making pronouncements, but there really isn't proper planning. So I've lived abroad for over a decade, and when major storms or hurricanes come, there's a very clear plan that starts being communicated days before it hits the ground. This is what's going to happen at some point. This will be, they call it categories. This will be a category 3, category 4 hurricane with winds of 100 and these kilometers per hour. And now when we get to this point, we are going to shut down these particular roads. We're going to make them one way, so people are not coming in, they are leaving out. There's an evacuation route, there's an evacuation plan. People are moving from this place to this place. And it's already planned that, we've gotten rid of things that used to be there, like social halls. And these social halls, especially in places prone to some of these disasters, would usually be in a, if you notice and remember, there'll be in a high elevation. At the top of a hill, there's a church, there's a school, there's this, or just a proper planning that says this area has so many people. If these people at the lowest ground are affected, we need to evacuate at least a third of this community. Where is a third of that community expected to go? What are they supposed to go with? When they go there, what is their shelter? What is their food? What are the basic needs and how are they catered for? So we are really not thinking through these aspects properly. You mentioned many aspects we can't even cover, but the bottom line is there's a challenge. You talked about the history. People have died here before. This is the first road that should be blocked off. It's the first place where there should be enforcement. It's the first place where that bridge should have been taken care of the last time there was an issue. People just patched it up and now it's a total collapse. You're looking at areas like Kitengela, Syokimau, just total carnage and just flooding of areas. There are such major issues where we don't seem to learn from experience. We don't have best practices where we don't repeat the same mistakes again. We don't have visionary leadership that can project ahead and plan and mitigate these things before they happen. And most importantly, there's too much cutting of shortcuts that prevents even the basics that could be done from being done. So people are losing lives and property as a result, and it's very unfortunate.
Very unfortunate indeed. So that is the conversation that we've had this morning, and we'd love to wrap it up at that point. We've talked about the schools, opening that has been postponed, and that late communication and just, the ripple effects of that economically as well as socially, and also on the floods disaster response, where the death toll has so far been recorded at 93. The Kenya Meteorological Department says, this is a season of long rains, and it is expected that the rains will continue in various parts of the country, and we still have a long way to go on just how we respond to disasters. And yet we have a budget that specifically deals with that. For instance, in Nairobi County, it is projected for this coming financial year, we'll be having a budget of 536 million shillings that goes into disasters. Well, disasters do happen, but how often? And is this money used in an appropriate way? So that is where we wrap it up this morning. Thank you for your wonderful company. Do keep it EBN TV. We've got amazing programming throughout the day, and we'll keep on updating you more on this particular issue on the schools as well as the floods disaster across the country. My name is Cynthia Nanjala. Do enjoy the rest of your broadcast.